can't imagine just like waking up and trying to sell a widget or like sell something that like wasn't doing good. It's too hard to build a business, in my opinion, to not do something that you're incredibly passionate about. I always tell founders, you want to have like your 3 levels of support.
One of the traps in this particular space that I've seen is an entrepreneur kind of jumping on the trend or the fad. And entrepreneurs are very opportunistic and latch on to a wave. But then it flames out because they don't have true passion and purpose. Quick thank you to our sponsor, The Gents Place. What is The Gents Place? Imagine a country club meets speakeasy meets barbershop. If you're interested in owning and running a business that you can actually be proud of, one built with confidence, community, and consistency, this is worth a look. With top location performance exceeding $1.4 million in gross sales, they are at the cutting edge of their industry and franchising in 30-plus states across the U.S. If that lights a fire for you, go to tgpfranchising.com, complete the form, and book an intro call to learn more about owning your very own location of the Gents Place. All right, guys and gals, welcome back to the Untrapped Entrepreneur. I've got Miriam Altman Reyes with me today, and Miriam is actually part of our post-exit founder group. That's how we got connected. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that in the episode as well. But quick bio on Miriam. She's an exited EdTech founder and CEO, former educator, and current investor in economic mobility technology. Miriam, you're going to have to explain what that is, by the way, because I have no idea. In 2008, she moved to New York to become a public high school teacher through the Teach for America program. And based on her experience in the classroom, she launched and led Kinvolved, a company dedicated to eradicating chronic absenteeism. In 2022, she sold the company to Power School, where she led the go-to-market strategy and partnerships and the launch of 5 new products. And based on her experience as an entrepreneur, she launched Brass Ring Ventures, an operator-led fund and growth studio investing in future of learning and work tech companies that drive positive economic and societal outcomes. Miriam, welcome. That's a great bio, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me, Ben. I'm excited to chat today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, so we'll talk about Brass Ring Ventures at some point in the very near future, but I'm always curious on the Untrapped show, just a little bit of your go back as early as you want. I mean, you can go back to when you were born, it's fine, but I'm always curious about how people are shaped, because that drives your life as an entrepreneur, how you think about things, how you process things, handling adversity. So anything you want to share anytime before you started your first company? That's the only rule. So start as early as you want or as late as you want, but you got to stop at the founding of your first company.
Okay, got it. No, this is a great question. So I actually grew up in the household of an entrepreneur. My dad's an entrepreneur, a social impact entrepreneur as well. He started a national nonprofit called Community Reinvestment Fund, which basically provides loans to small businesses and other kind of community development organizations to help improve sort of the urban landscape for communities across the United States. And so he started the company when I was about 2 years old. So my early memories are like running around in the conference room and like eating my peanut butter and jelly under the conference table, when we didn't have our they didn't have childcare for the day. And then as I got older, when my friends were taking days off, days off of school, and they were going and hanging out, I was at my dad's office, filing business cards and, filing papers and that kind of thing, which at the time I was like, this is so annoying. But in hindsight, of course, it was very influential to really see firsthand that you can build something from zero and it takes a lot of hard work. But it was a great learning experience. So that was sort of my influence in my childhood. My parents always said, you can do whatever you want. They never were the kinds of parents who were you have to go to school to be a doctor or a lawyer or something really prescribed. They were go to school to learn and to learn skills and learn how to think. I went to a liberal arts college, and we trust that your going to get the, expertise and the skills that you need and the experience you need to like figure out how to like make a way for yourself down the road. So I'm always like really grateful for that influence and perspective my parents had and the support that they had. And so, obviously I became an entrepreneur. My very first entrepreneurial endeavor, one of my first, at least I can remember, was when I was in college. I created my own, it's called a concentration, but a major essentially. I really wanted to study journalism. I thought I wanted to become a journalist. And so but we didn't have journalism at my liberal arts school as like a major, again, because you're not supposed to be like going into a particular track to like, go into a particular career. And so I created my own concentration called News Media and Societal Change. I really like studied the cycle of the news media and its impact on public opinion and vice versa, thinking I was going to start, go into journalism. And I decided not to do that because 2008, when I graduated, was like not a great time for the industry, as I was observing and I was told. So I took a pivot and became a teacher. I did the Teacher America program in New York City. Not something I'd studied in college, not something I'd planned, but, it was really appealing as I was recruited for the program because I think being a teacher, definitely in hindsight, but I kind of had this instinct going in, is incredibly entrepreneurial. You're kind of like, at least in my case, kind of thrown in with the wolves and got to figure out how to, stay afloat, not only stay afloat, but actually like make an impact on a bunch of kids and their lives and their outcomes. So it's a really entrepreneurial experience. And also, just having the opportunity to participate in the program was amazing. So, and that really like that experience in the classroom put me, as you kind of shared in your bio, on the track to starting my first company. So.
Wow. Well, interesting. I want to talk about one thing that's really important: peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Okay. So we have a common connection in New York. When I moved to New York and transferred to NYU from UT Austin, we were so poor. I remember going to the store and we bought this bread that was like less than $1, 80 cents or something like that. But when I got the bread home, some of it had holes in it. So I had to take the loaf of bread and organize it, the ones with holes and without holes, because when you put the peanut butter and jelly in, if you had it on I learned the hard way, if you have one with holes on the bottom, everything falls through the bottom.
Yeah,
so
that
I had
makes
to be
sense.
very strategic about the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Amazing.
A father that's an entrepreneur and just living that life, you get really used to change. You get used to probably scarcity, things just not being predictable in any way. So I know that helps out as an entrepreneur because it's just probably normal for you to have adversity and not know what's going to happen tomorrow, right?
Yeah, you just gotta kind of like do your best and like, be adaptable and figure it out along the way. And that certainly is not a way that most, if not, many people are comfortable living. But I think my parents did a great job of providing a lot of stability. But I definitely observed like you gotta when there's an economic crash in 2008, you gotta just like get on a plane every other day basically to try to like keep your business afloat, right? Especially you're like in his case in the financial markets as an example, right? You just got to like figure it out and be adaptable and do your best to navigate. And it was a great example.
I started my first business in '08, which is right when I hear 2008, I have to smile and laugh because if I don't, I'll cry. But I got an SBA loan 2 weeks before Lehman Brothers collapsed.
Oh, wow.
So I remember what it was like. I'm like, 25-year-old. I'm going to start my first business, and I couldn't have started it at the worst time. So I can relate to '08, having plans to do something, and then all your plans change, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Social entrepreneurship, conscious capitalism, B Corps, there's all of these things that happen and have been happening, I think, over the last couple of decades about not just being in business to make money, that you're in business to do good. One of the things on my LinkedIn profile is that I make money to make a positive difference in people's lives. You certainly, your entrepreneur history, I think you'd probably share that mindset. Like, I couldn't imagine being in business and not having a core part of my business be in service to others, right? I couldn't imagine being in business just to make money and then to make more money and to make more money and then that's it. Tell me a little bit more about how you think about entrepreneurship from that standpoint, and like start, what's important to you in terms of helping other people, and just how you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I deeply believe, and I'm an example of this, in the success of my last business and what I'm trying to now invest in through Brassring Ventures, that it is very possible to do well and do good. You don't have to take concessionary capital and concessionary returns, right? Like there are kind of funds that are focused on sort of that ethos and concept. But I truly believe that you can build a business that does well by people and does, makes a positive impact on society, and also like provides great returns for shareholders. And like I said, I'm sort of an example of that in my own entrepreneurial journey. And I'm taking bets on founders that are building businesses that are similar. The things that I can't imagine similar to you, Ben, like, with my last company, and again, what I do today, I can't imagine just like waking up and trying to sell a widget or like sell something that like wasn't doing good. It's too hard to build a business, in my opinion, to not do something that you're incredibly passionate about. And to me, passion like aligns very much with doing something that's like making a positive mark and an impact on the world. And so, of course, for me, it was like I identified this key pain point around student absenteeism when I was a teacher that I didn't really know it existed and people weren't really talking about at the time. And, identified that when kids, of course, aren't coming to school, it's nearly impossible to prepare them for, graduation. And obviously graduation also ties to, long-term economic opportunity and mobility, and getting a little bit to the point of brass ring as well. And so, I really was passionate about trying to figure out what was going on. Why weren't kids coming to school? What could we do about it? Not just accepting the status quo, which unfortunately I think a lot of my amazing, teachers and mentors, when I asked them, like, what do I do about the fact that kids aren't showing up to school? The answer was like, you just got to do the best for the kids who are here. And I was like, that's not really acceptable in my opinion. So definitely felt like as an educator, I'd identified this problem, left the classroom, had finally a little bit of capacity. Being a teacher is really hard and it's fairly time consuming. So as a full-time student, I was able to actually look at the research and the data and saw that this absenteeism crisis wasn't just affecting my classroom or my school, or even just New York City students, where 250,000 kids were missing a month of school every year. It was really a national crisis way back in 2013 when I started my company. And unfortunately, it's continued to be a problem that was really exacerbated by the pandemic since then. And so I saw that not only was there, a huge pain point that no one else was solving, but also a pain point that if we could solve it, it could actually make school districts money. The way that school systems in a lot of states across the U.S. are funded, really every state to some degree, some kind of placing more importance on student attendance than others, but there's a funding formula that accounts for student attendance in school. And so literally in California and Texas, obviously two of the biggest states in the country with the highest populations of students, they get a dollar value per student per day that they attend school. And they also miss out on a dollar value per student per day that they don't attend school. And so we are able to say, we're going to build a platform that is proving, based on third-party research, to improve student attendance, get kids into the seats. Not only does that make a positive outcome, obviously, for the students and for the communities that they live in, because they're not on the streets, they're in school, they're being educated, they're getting the skills and the experience that they need to be successful and graduate high school and hopefully go on to college and career readiness, et cetera. But also we're able to provide a solution that's bringing money into school districts. So it's sort of like a win-win. And so I think that that's just one example of many types of businesses. So it doesn't have to be education technology. It doesn't have to be workforce technology, which is sort of like my lane, but you can have solutions that are making a positive impact on the climate, that are making a positive impact in other areas, right? In healthcare, in financial literacy and inclusion, that not only are driving results and ROI for end customers, governments, et cetera, but also are having a really positive impact in society. And so, those are the kinds of solutions that really get me up and going every morning. Now, again, sort of wearing now a dual hat of running a business where we're supporting entrepreneurs that are kind of building businesses with a similar ethos and opportunity, but also as an investor where I'm looking for, solutions and companies that are making, again, this positive impact in society, but not taking a haircut on the return potential as a result of that, but still really equally.
Still needs to be a for-profit business, right?
Exactly. Yep.
The Untrapped show focuses on some of the things that happen during the entrepreneurial journey that a trap you find yourself in. And part of the show is just exposing that, and whether you fell in the trap and you can help other people not fall in it, or you've seen others, especially from your angle now, looking and working it with other founders. One of the traps in this particular space that I've seen is an entrepreneur kind of jumping on the trend or the fad. So like, they see an opportunity in a particular area, maybe the workforce management or the B Corp or the conscious capital. It's a movement, and entrepreneurs are very opportunistic and latch on to a wave. But then it flames out because they don't have true passion and purpose, like in that particular business. So I'm just curious, like, do you see that? Do you see people that come to you at Brass Ring looking for funding and looking for guidance, and you can see someone that's just maybe purely opportunistic or mostly opportunistic? Like, do you sniff that out and say, hey, this just seems like a money play. You're just kind of latching on to something and trying to ride the wave, versus you have this deep passion for the business that, as a founder going through it, like, you have to have that to get through, right? It's not going to last if you're just focused on riding the wave for a few years and trying to sell.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like in particular in the sectors that I have most experience with, future of learning, future of work, so EdTech kind of broadly, there was a term in sort of the industry where there was sort of like EdTech tourism is the term I've heard used during the pandemic, where like valuations just went crazy and there's so much money going in at like unprecedented rates. And then, as a lot of these companies weren't successful or didn't grow at the rates that, weren't able to sustain the growth after the pandemic for a variety of reasons. A lot of that funding, investment, a lot of those businesses didn't continue to be available in the industry. And it really like left a pretty big a gap, honestly, for sort of a lot of these companies that are trying to build and grow. And so I've seen some of that, and definitely I'm skeptical of founders who kind of were getting started at that stage and had no like prior lived experience, background, insider perspective on like what it really takes to build a business in this area that can be sustainable. And then it's not, again, just like riding the wave of, third party kind of like investors who don't know a lot about the space. I also like think that there's a lot of, I was talking to someone earlier today and yesterday about this. I think there's a lot of people who maybe have had exits in like other sectors or, are parents, and like they see a problem their kid is having or something, or like have had experience like in building a business outside of the industry. And they're like, okay, I've like identified a problem. They have really good intentions. They want to come in and solve it, but they really don't know how to navigate the complexity of like the regulatory environment, like really how to understand the decision-making process, like the sales cycles, the complexity of decision-making, and also how to speak to the end customer. And so that's always a red flag for me. It's like, if you don't have, intentions are great, but if you don't really like have the expertise in your team to speak the language of your customer, it's going to be really challenging to actually excel and eventually grow the business. I would also say, companies that are, founders that are trying to just attract investment, right? And they're like more focused on like their valuations and how much money they can raise than actually servicing their customers is a concern, right? Like, I always tell founders, you shouldn't like tell me the story I want to hear. You should like tell me the story that your customer that has been successful in actually growing your business and expanding your market and retaining your customers. Like, what are your customers telling you? What are they saying is valuable with this product? What are they saying is important about the solution that you're solving? What's the opportunity? What's the roadmap? Like, let them tell you the story, let them sell for you, both to other customers and also to your investors. That's the story that I really want to hear, is like genuinely, what's happening on the ground and how connected are you to your end, buyer essentially and users. And then I think like another, sort of related trap that sometimes founders get into is being like really isolated. That's a common, trend and theme that we hear, right? And a lot of founders have experienced before. And I think that that's like a very solvable challenge. I think, I always tell founders, you want to have like your 3 levels of support. You want to have like your personal advisory board, which also might be your business advisory board. People who've like been through it before, who are not just a traditional VC necessarily, right? Like, you might have a VC or 2 on your board, and that's fine. But you want people who actually can have had that lived experience that you are now going through, who can relate and help guide you through the challenges that you are facing and inevitably will face. You want to have a community of peers, other founders, in your sector and outside your sector who can like give you kind of the hard truths of what they're experiencing and vice versa, that maybe you wouldn't be comfortable asking, questions you wouldn't be comfortable asking your advisors or your investors. And third, you need to have a really amazing team of leaders that you work with and who you can rely on, so you don't feel like you have to kind of do everything, because that's certainly not sustainable and scalable. So yeah, those are
Well,
a
that's a
couple of
plug
the
for
trends I
PEF I
see.
had mentioned at the very beginning, right?
Yeah.
Having a community of people, post-exit founders are people that have actually exited businesses successfully in the past. And not that they're any more special than founders that have not exited, but you go through things, building a business and ultimately selling it, and then being on the other side. There's people in that group that have no idea what they want to do the rest of their life. There's people that have figured out exactly what they want to do the rest of their life. And then a lot of folks in the middle. But that community, whether it's post-exit founders, you sold your company, or industry specific, or intentionally not industry specific, right, is even more helpful a lot of times, where people know nothing about your business, but they know about business. They can be outside looking in, pointing some things out, blind spots, things like that. At Brass Ring Ventures, I'm curious, and I'm did some review of your website. You guys are you mentioned hands-on support. Like, there's a coaching and development element to everything that you do, bringing in founders that are aligned, and taking them through this process. I think it's like 6 to 18 month process. Because there is a lot of coaching and development, and people aren't coming fully formed, there's got to be some point where you say you're not quite ready, or there's a red flag, or come back to us later. Like, I'll give you a crude example in the haircut business, one of my primary businesses. If someone comes to us and they're like, the values match and everything, the intentions, but they just can't cut hair, my manager will say, hey, go to XYZ Clips joint and go mess up a bunch of hair for 6 months and then come back to us. And we've had people do that. And they come back and they're like, hey, I figured this part out. Talk to me about that. Like, when are you sending people back and saying not yet, or just not at all?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we really, ideally like to get involved at the seed stage. And that, we define that as companies that are somewhere between 500K and 2 million in revenue. So definitely early stage, but they've probably been through a couple of cycles. They definitely have customers. They have some retention data to show. They've got those early proof points, right? There are occasions where we'll work a little bit earlier stage. There are occasions when we'll work a little bit later stage, but ideally we're coming at the seed, and we're really helping companies and founders cross the chasm, essentially, from that seed to Series A. So professional, taking it from, like I said, around 1 million in revenue, give or take, and figuring out what's worked to get those customers to where they are, and how do we really replicate and build systems that will get you to kind of that growth stage where all you have to do is theoretically, right, put the money in and the company will grow. That's kind of like where we really do our best work. We do work with companies a little bit earlier stage, helping them get to that seed stage if we feel really high conviction. But where we don't work is like pre-revenue, just idea stage. We really typically don't work with companies that are less than like 250K in revenue. We want to see that there's some real like customer traction and proof of, willingness to pay for the solution as one of the kind of key filters, I guess, through which we look at founders. We do have partnerships and collaborations with a couple of earlier stage, like accelerator kind of programs, where we might like what we see and we want to help the founder, and we'll send them over to these programs. One's called the Transcend Network, for example, in our sector. And then on the other hand, we have, lots of relationships with more like Series A, Series B stage investors that can help founders that have already gone through kind of our programs, where we'll invest and then we'll kind of kick them out of the nest, as I like to say, into that next stage. So we're really clear about kind of where we sit. Outside of like company stage, we, again, I think in our particular sector, having that like what I would say insider's perspective is really important. A lived experience in some way where you really know how to speak the language of the customers, like you have a unique insider perspective on problems that people outside the sector might not understand even exist and need to be solved. How to execute getting a solution, building a solution, what that should look like, and then how to like eventually start distributing it. Like that's something we critically look at. And then secondly, because our model is so hands-on and we want to be so collaborative with founders, we also look for founders that really are looking for like coaching, guidance, support, and want to work with us, and will kind of see that mutual value add in what our team can bring. So, I'm the kind of managing partner of Brass Ring Ventures, but I also have a full-time lead operating partner who is the CFO, COO of my last company. We worked together for 6 years, and we work really closely with a number of our companies. And we have 5 part-time operating partners who've also held executive level roles through the exit, not only of my own company, but of several others across the sector. So it's like a really unique group of people that's kind of hard to find on your own. And we want to make sure that founders that we bring in are excited about and like willing to take the support that's available to them that we provide. That's a lot more than just the capital.
What's the most common, let's call it the common avatar, common persona, common pattern of a founder that you turn down that otherwise meets all of the financial and stage criteria? Because I'm trying to get to our listeners that are out there raising money, they're starting businesses, they need money from someone like you, they need help, but they're in some sort of a trap, or they're just misaligned. They're showing up in a way that is minimizing their opportunities, maybe without them realizing it. So they check the revenue boxes, they check the industry, they check the expertise. Any patterns that are showing up where you're saying no to a certain type of person?
It's a really great question. I think that like we're looking for the right in the way that founders present themselves, which is obviously really critical when you're fundraising and outside of fundraising. I think we're looking for that right mix of confidence in what you've done, in where you're going, in sort of the vision for the business and the opportunity, but also humility and understanding like you don't have all the answers. No one ever does. And particularly like, founders that are at the early stages certainly don't have all the answers, and that's okay. And we're actually like, we want to know authentically, like what are the answers you don't know, you don't have the answers to yet, because that also helps us identify like where can we plug in, help you find those answers in a collaborative way. So I think that's, when it comes to sort of how founders present, that's really like the mix that we're typically looking for.
You don't want to invest in a know-it-all.
No, not a know-it-all. We do like people who've been through multiple, have obviously like exited, obviously like reduces the risk when you're talking about making an investment. And there are, one-off kind of cases or edge cases, I guess is the right word, where we'll invest more passively, even though it's a little bit outside of our model, in the case where it's like the founders really don't need our help. Like they've got it all, they've got it figured out maybe, but not on their own. Like they have other people, whether it's on their leadership team, whether it's other investors, whether it's other advisors, they have sort of their like bench of support, and they're not just trying to do it themselves to help them figure out the answers to questions. If we're not it, that's okay. But we just want to make sure that they, again, are exhibiting both the confidence and the vision, but also the humility to know that, you can't build a business entirely on your own. And usually not even with like 2 co-founders. It's not really enough to really get to scale that VCs are really looking for.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you see some of these founders that are stuck, like everything checked out at the beginning, they even exited maybe prior before, maybe not, but like this is going to be the best founder we've ever invested in. All of the partners, part-time, full-time, this is it. And they get stuck. Any commonalities there post-investment going through that you're seeing these founders have in their journey after they're already formally connected with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, again, a balanced question is like, find the right balance between investing enough to grow your business, but also not being frivolous with cash, especially in the current like market environment. Founders and companies can't afford to do that. You have to really like manage cash carefully. And, and I think like one of the themes that comes out is, two of the themes that are kind of related to that are just the ability to like really manage cash, which is not, there's a lot of founders, again, who really have that passion, that like lived experience, but they don't necessarily, especially if it's their first business, they don't necessarily have the business fundamentals. And that's where our team really like shines and comes in and helps provide that support. And we have a framework called Advise, Educate, and Execute. So we're trying to help advise founders, but also helping educate them in how to gain those business fundamentals so that they can eventually, again, as we like kick them out of the nest, they'll have those like teachable skills embedded, but not being able to like pick up on how to manage cash and capital effectively and navigate between, investing enough to grow at a effective rate, right? But also not over investing in the wrong things is a kind of a key theme that I'd say that we see, and we provide a lot of like guardrails for founders and sort of like sometimes tough love and guidance in that area. And then relatedly, I think it's investing in the wrong type of talent at the wrong time. So sometimes, founders want to bring in, as their very first salesperson, like they want to bring in someone who's like coming out of a major publicly traded company and like never has had startup sales experience, but they have a big logo associated. And with that big logo comes a really big, salary expectation that can be really, expensive for, an early stage company. And what we'd rather see is often founders be willing to, hire someone a little bit scrappier who maybe came from a startup, maybe they came from the classroom and had a short stint in a startup, in the case of an EdTech company, for example. And they, again, really can speak to the customers and they're quick learners. That's really what you need, I think, in a startup. And oftentimes it's a little bit more affordable. Also thinking about like, when do you really need to make a full-time hire versus when can you effectively like stretch far enough with contractors and part-time hires? You don't have to make, you don't have, when you're bringing a new role in for the very first time, it doesn't always have to be full-time from the get-go. Sometimes that's appropriate, but not always. So those are some of the things that we find commonly we're helping founders in.
I've heard the story so many times where a founder has hired someone from Fortune 500, they're super successful career, and they get in and the very first thing he or she says is like, okay, we need to send this over to the marketing department and send this over to finance and send this over to ops. And you're like, dude, we don't have those
That's
departments.
you.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard where someone comes in and out in like 90 days who was the best hire at Google, at you name it company, right? So I definitely think that's a trap early on is, you get enamored with someone's resume instead of their ability to handle adversity really well, willingness to wear any hat and do anything it takes to be successful, and just being smart and just being willing to do whatever it takes.
100%. I've had personal missteps with making that error. I've seen founders do it, try to advise founders out of making those, errors, but it's super common, I think, across any industry.
Yeah. I just got off another call with a gentleman that sold to private equity, and private equity totally destroyed his business. They've fired dozens of employees. The financials are off track. It seems like that's another common theme. And I don't know if it's necessarily a trap during the operations of the business, but maybe a trap in selling a business, thinking you're selling it the right way. You want to take care of your people. You want to have this legacy. You're doing everything with the right intentions, but it seems to be a common story where private equity comes in and makes a bunch of decisions almost purely based on financials. Do you have any thoughts or guidance around that? Like, how do you sell a business? And if you care about your people and you care about the legacy of the company and what happens next, any advice around how to avoid that trap of selling to, the wrong buyer and then regretting selling the company to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one thing that I spend a lot of time on is like building strategic partnerships, and oftentimes that's in the service of building relationships for M&A down the road. And my belief is that, early on, I think founders should start spending, CEOs specifically, should spend some relatively small percentage of their time, say like 5, no more than 10%, as you're really trying to build the company. Less than 10%, 5%, right? When you're not actively looking to sell and you're a couple years out, but taking calls with those potential acquirers that are reaching out inbound to start learning about your business and building a relationship, take those calls, and it's 30 minutes, once a week, or maybe not even that frequently. And then they check in with you like, every quarter, every 6 months, or once a year or something. So you're like building a relationship. You're also understanding the different players in the field, and you're asking lots of questions. Talk as little as possible. Let them talk as much as you can get them to talk. Ask a lot of questions like, what are the benchmarks that they're looking for? What types of companies have they, bought and let who, on behalf of which of their companies? What are sort of like the outcomes that they've seen? after their acquisition, what happens with their team, ask as many questions as you possibly can. And again, like build those relationships so you get a little bit of a lay of the land so that when you're getting ready to be able to sell, whether it's like based on your decision or based on like an inbound, which is what happened with my last company, you have some perspective and you're not just going off of what you're learning from one particular opportunity that you might need to make a decision on pretty quickly. The second thing I would say is talk to other founders always who have been acquired by a company that you're considering an acquisition with or an acquisition by to really, it's usually two different stories. Like usually you'll hear a story that the PE firm or whomever it is at the acquiring company tells you, and then there's a different story often that, a founder or CEO or, any founder really will tell you about the experience on the back end. And it's not uncommon that you're able to kind of get that like backdoor reference. If you can get more than one, that's even better. I did that in my own process. I found it extremely helpful to also just like levels as we're going in. I'm getting told one story by the acquirer. Usually 100% of what you're sold by acquirer is not true, right? And that's fine. That's part of the process. But it helped me level set my expectations based on recent prior founders' experiences. And that's something that we definitely advise founders in doing as they're, going through processes. But yeah, I would say build the relationships early, get to know the individuals, get to try to understand the kinds of deals that they do and what the outcomes are, what the hold period is, et cetera. Like how do they treat the businesses that they acquire? Do they just shut them down? Do they lay the whole staff off? Do they keep them running? Do they invest in them, et cetera? What are their patterns? And then, talk to people who've recently been through the experience once you're actually like getting into a process.
Yeah. Makes sense. Every time I ask this question, I always have somebody that watches the show and says like, that was me, or that hit home with me. Like it without question, when you tell a story, a real story, right, about someone being stuck, that's you. Like someone in the audience, that's you. You've been there, or you're about to go there. So I want to wrap with, don't name names, all right? But a time when you have had to intervene when a founder is really stuck. You had to intervene, even if it may have gone great and got him out of it, or ended poorly, doesn't matter. But just walk us through what happened when they were stuck, if you can think of one of those, and just how you navigated that, how you talked through it. And I'm certain I'll probably keep my track record here. Someone's going to say that's me. I was in that, right?
Yeah.
So anything come to mind?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short because I have like two that come to mind that will be really relatable. One is just, co-founder dynamics, right? Like it is common to have challenges between co-founders, right? And there's a company that, I've supported for a number of years is kind of going through a process of evaluating the co-founder relationship and kind of determining whether to kind of keep things, sort of keep both co-founders active versus rolling one off, and how to navigate that, both preserve the relationship and also kind of preserve the equity of the company. There's lots of different sort of needles to thread in that scenario. And there's one in particular situation I'm thinking, but as I'm talking this through, there's actually like 2 or 3 experiences I've had with founders in prior, years and months, which all are very similar. And so I think it's like, looking at what are the challenges and try to be objective as possible. What is like, keep the business in mind, right? The customers, the business opportunity in mind first, like what's actually best for the company without getting like personal and kind of pulling those dynamics into it. Okay, what's the desired outcome? And then how do we kind of back into that outcome in like the least disruptive way for the business, for the customers, for the team, and for the individuals who are affected, right? And affected. Trying to be empathetic if it's a situation in which someone is being, rolled out of out of their role, and kind of taking a step back from the company. But also, being firm and kind of keeping the business's best interest in mind. So it's always a challenge, and it can be tricky, but it is not an uncommon thing to deal with. I guess to give you specifics, like there's a company that's kind of going through that. The founder gave more equity than I think I guided, and later acknowledged this as as the founder came back to ask for guidance on how to sort of like untangle from the situation a bit, they decided that the co-founder who came into the business a couple of years in, provided a lot of value, but was going to, exit the business after being with the firm for, the company for a couple of years, and wanted guidance on how to navigate the fact that this person had already vested, like 15% of the business's equity just in the first couple of years. And, do I buy it back? Do I, are investors going to care about this? Do I do this now? Do I do it in the future? And so just helping like navigate all of those sort of questions is important. And then the other kind of like ties a little bit back to one of the things I mentioned earlier that is a common trap, to use your language, that founders can fall into, which is just like kind of cash management. And particularly in like a period where there's just not a lot of liquidity in the market, particularly again in like sort of education and future of work over the last couple of years, after a couple of really good years, like liquidity has dried up a bit. It has been hard for companies to raise money, and the sort of acquisitions that have been occurring are somewhat fewer and further between, right? And helping a couple of companies kind of navigate how to manage cash and be realistic about their fundraising capabilities, as well as like when to pull the trigger between trying to continue to, raise money versus like seeking an acquisition opportunity, right? Even if maybe it's not like the most amazing outcome that they would have imagined, like what's realistic and how do you kind of land the plane? Those are sometimes challenging circumstances to try to navigate. And again, it's a lot about like expectation setting, I think, for founders and sometimes their boards and, and others who are involved, but it's not terribly uncommon. So
yeah. Founder marriages and money is a good
Yeah.
theme there. It can create all kinds of problems and
Absolutely.
opportunities, right? Hey, Miriam, I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I want our listeners to know where to find you. We've got brassring.vc, I know is the website, but what's the best way to connect with you personally? Is it LinkedIn, email address, anything that you want to share so people can follow back up with you?
Yeah, definitely. I try to respond as much as I possibly can on LinkedIn. It depends on, how responsive I am depends on, I think, like the amount of messages in the inbox, but I try to respond there. For founders in particular, we have an application to join our studio and consider joining our portfolio on our website. And so I always, even if I get sort of a connection, I try to direct people to complete that form. It takes 5 minutes, and that's a great way to get on our radar. We respond to everyone who applies that way. Otherwise, for general inquiries, info@brassring.vc is a good place to find us. And I'll just put a quick plug in. We're going to be starting to make the first investments out of our fund in early 2026. And we're actively raising our first fund right now. And so we're both excited about talking with entrepreneurs, but also investors who are interested in the space. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Nice. Investor interest, send you a LinkedIn message or email you?
Yeah, LinkedIn or just our general email works as well.
Okay, perfect. Miriam, great chatting with you. Hopefully I see you at a post-exit founder group at some point. Like I said before, hit me up if you're in Dallas. I'll do the same when I get to Miami.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. I appreciate having me on.